Young Waitress helped a lost dad at the café. Billionaire CEO realized something money can't buy. Before we dive in, I want to know, where in the world are you watching from right now? Type your city in the comments so we can see just how far this story reaches. And when we get to the end, I dare you to rate it from 0 to 10, because this one might just break your heart. Now, settle in and enjoy the story. It was a crisp autumn morning in Portland. Pale sunlight slipped through the cafe windows, mingling with the warm scent of cinnamon and freshly roasted coffee. In that quiet, golden glow, Daniel Carter, once a celebrated CEO who commanded skyscraper boardrooms, sat alone in a rumpled suit, hands wrapped around a cup of black coffee gone cold. Beside him sat Sophie, 6 years old still as a porcelain figurine, her pale blue eyes fixed on some faraway point. For nearly a year now, she hadn't answered a single person. Then, between the steady hum of the espresso machine and the faint clink of spoons against porcelain, Lena Harper, a young waitress with a hearing aid tucked behind her ear, walked over. She knelt so her gaze met Sophie's, her hands moving gently through the air. "What would you like to drink?" Daniel almost said. "She won't answer." But before the words left his lips, Sophie blinked, and her tiny hands began to sign back strawberry milk. In that instant, it was as if glass shattered inside him, cracks spreading through the solid wall of despair, letting the first shard of light slip in. And Daniel didn't yet know, this young woman had just touched something that all the money, power, and prestige of a billionaire CEO could never buy back. Midday in Portland. The little cafe on the corner of 9th Avenue was filled to capacity, the hiss of the espresso machine blending with the hum of laughter and conversation. Sunlight slanted through the tall glass windows, spilling across polished wooden tables where the warm scent of cinnamon and fresh-baked pastries drifted like a gentle embrace. Lena Harper, 24. Her blonde hair pulled neatly back, the glint of a hearing aid catching the golden light moved with practiced ease between tables. She worked here full-time to support her deaf younger sister, having set aside her dream of becoming a sign language teacher. The door opened. Daniel Carter, 38, stepped in crisp white shirt, gray suit rumpled at the edges. The look of a man who had once orchestrated multi-million-dollar deals, now carrying the quiet weight of exhaustion. Beside him walked Sophie, 6 years old, her golden hair shining softly, her gaze fixed somewhere far beyond the world around her. She hadn't spoken, hadn't responded to anyone. For almost a year, they chose a table by the window. Lena approached with a tray in hand, then crouched to meet Sophie's eyes. Her hands moved gently in the air. "What would you like to drink?" Daniel was about to interject, but stopped. Sophie's pale lashes fluttered and her tiny hands signed back strawberry milk. For the first time in nearly a year, Sophie had reached out, her voice found not in sound, but in motion. And in that moment, amid the hiss of the coffee machine and the cinnamon in the air, Daniel felt as if someone had thrown open a door in his heart that had been locked for far too long. If you were Daniel, what would you do when a complete stranger could make your child smile again? Share your thoughts below. I want to hear your answer. Chapter 1. The Fateful Meeting. Autumn afternoons in Portland carried their own kind of lazy charm. The air wasn't too cold nor too warm, just enough for the scent of dry maple leaves to drift in through the windows of maple and steam. Inside, the espresso machine purred low milk froth, swirling into soft, cloud-like spirals. Sunlight spilled through the tall glass panes, painting the polished wooden tables in a golden honey glaze. Lena Harper, 24, moved between tables with the practiced rhythm of someone who knew every inch of the space. Her blonde hair was neatly tied back, the ends swaying with each step. On her left ear, a silver hearing aid caught the light, a detail she no longer noticed, though it often drew curious glances. She had grown accustomed to them over the years. They no longer stung. The door swung open, letting in a draft that carried the faint bite of street air and the scent of exhaust. The man who stepped in didn't command attention with charm or polish, but with the quiet contrast he brought to the warm, bustling room. His dark gray suit was creased at the elbows, his tie loosened, the top 2 buttons of his white shirt undone. His brown hair was slightly mussed, his eyes shadowed from too many nights without rest. Following him was a small girl no more than 6, her golden hair falling in soft strands over her shoulders. Her eyes, clear pale blue, held the faraway stillness of a sky untouched by wind. She neither spoke nor smiled, her gaze sliding past everything as if she belonged to some other place entirely. Lena set down 2 menus with a polite, "What can I get for you today?" No reply. The man offered a faint, apologetic smile, ready to speak for them, but Lena tilted her head, her gaze shifting to the little girl. Her hands began to move in the air, fluid and gentle as flowing water. "What would you like to drink?" For a moment, those blue eyes flickered like a light catching on in a forgotten room. Sophie's small fingers moved slowly and returned strawberry milk. Lena's lips curved into a smile. She said nothing more, only gave a small nod and jotted it down. Daniel, the man, froze. He looked at his daughter, then at Lena, something flickering in his expression, a fragile glint of light in the dark. You know sign language." His voice was low, almost wary. "I'm hard of hearing," Lena replied, tapping her hearing aid. "So yes, I do." Something tightened in his throat. Nearly a year had passed since he'd seen his daughter respond to anyone beyond the bare minimum. And now, to a stranger, she had answered. Lena returned with their drinks, a black coffee for Daniel and a pale pink glass of strawberry milk for Sophie. She placed the milk in front of the girl, nodding once, then doodled a tiny strawberry on the order slip. Sophie looked at it, and her lips curved into the faintest, shyest smile. It was small, so small, but Daniel saw it. "She hasn't smiled in a long time," he murmured. Lena looked up, waiting for him to continue. "Her mother left almost a year ago," he said, his gaze drifting toward the window where maple leaves spiraled to the ground. "Since that day, she hasn't spoken, hasn't laughed. The doctors, the therapy, nothing worked." His mouth lifted in a humorless smile. "I'd started to think I'd lost her for good." Lena didn't reach for hollow comfort. She simply placed her hand lightly on the table, fingers brushing Sophie's, and signed, "Is it good?" Sophie nodded, her smile growing by a fraction. Daniel swallowed hard, not because of the answer, but because of the way his daughter looked at this woman. As if she had found a bridge back to the world. The cafe bustled on, orders called out, the door chime ringing. But at the table by the window, time seemed to slow. Each time Lena passed, Sophie signed a new word, friend, or smile. Lena would reply with a grin or a signed good job. Daniel thought of his years in boardrooms where success was measured in deals and margins. He had once believed he could control every variable, but not this. Not the quiet lock his daughter had placed on her heart. And yet, in less than an hour, this woman had done what he could not. In 12 months, she had opened a crack for light to come through. When Lena set down the check, Daniel hesitated. "Thank you for talking to her." "I didn't just talk to her," Lena said softly, tilting her head with a small smile. "I listened." They left when the afternoon light had begun to turn amber. Daniel held Sophie's hand, but at the door he paused, glancing back. Lena was clearing a table, sunlight spilling over the curve of her cheek. His gaze lingered, not with the look of a man toward a woman, but of a father who had just witnessed a quiet miracle. Sophie tugged his sleeve and signed something. He didn't catch it at first. She repeated it slower. "See you tomorrow." Daniel's brows lifted. Then a rare laugh escaped him, one he hadn't heard from himself in months. "Yeah, see you tomorrow." Do you think Daniel will return tomorrow just for Sophie, or for another reason entirely? Leave your guess in the comments. Inside, Lena cleared the cups, her hand brushing over the chair where Sophie had sat. She couldn't say why the moment left her so warm inside, whether it was the way Daniel had looked at his daughter or the way Sophie's tiny hands had signed friend. Outside, Daniel's gray sedan slipped into the stream of traffic until it was gone. Lena tucked the order slip into her apron pocket. The words, "strawberry milk," scrawled in a child's handwriting remained. A small record of a meeting that might have seemed ordinary, yet could change far more than they realized. Do you believe in fate, that a simple afternoon could be the beginning of a story that changes everything? Share a time you met someone and knew deep down your life would never be the same. Chapter 2. The Invisible Thread. Morning in Portland broke beneath a sheer veil of mist, as if someone had draped a silk scarf over the red crowns of the maple trees. Maple and Steam opened early, the door chime tinkling softly, the scent of cinnamon still woven deep into the wood. Lena wiped down the window table, the same one from yesterday, slower than usual, as though she were touching a piece of good news, still warm in her hands. The door creaked open. Daniel stepped in sharper than the day before, tie-knotted dark coat pressed smooth. The polish couldn't hide the faint shadows under his eyes, but it was a reminder this wasn't just a single father. This was Daniel Carter, a man who had once stood toe-to-toe with another billionaire CEO to negotiate a merger, a man who could make numbers on a stock ticker dance to his will. Beside him, Sophie clutched a rust-colored stuffed fox. She scanned the cafe without a word until her eyes found Lena. A delicate shimmer flickered in her gaze. Lena paused mid-step, then smiled, pressing her hand gently to her chest in greeting. She signed, "Good morning, Sophie. Want strawberry milk today?" Sophie's small hands answered, quick and fluttery like a fledgling's wings. "Yes. And toast." The word for toast was a little wobbly, but clear enough for Daniel to notice. He blinked. Just a beat, but in that beat something shifted in him. The man who could read a stock chart at a glance was now learning to read the soft curves of his daughter's hands. Lena returned with a glass of strawberry milk and a plate of toast spread with butter and honey. She slid into the chair across from Sophie, fingertips on her own cheeks, as if tying an invisible ribbon to the child's focus. "Let's learn a new word today," she signed. "Smile." Sophie watched, her head tilted like she was listening to a silent song. Lena touched her index finger to the corner of her mouth and pushed it outward. Eyes narrowing into a playful grin, a smile made by hands. Sophie copied the motion, lips curling. Shy at first. Then she placed a hand on her chest, tapping twice. Happy. Daniel didn't look away. The joy tapped softly against his ribs. "She's coming back," he murmured almost to himself. Lena just nodded. She knew returns like this happened in silence. From then on, they came back. Not by arrangement, but as if led by an invisible thread. At exactly 10:15, the window table would be waiting with a glass of strawberry milk and a napkin Lena had folded into a tiny fox to greet Sophie. "Your new regular Mara," the silver-haired owner teased. "My smallest class." Lena smiled. Their lessons began with games. Lena drew an elephant, curled her arm for the trunk, and signed elephant. Sophie's silent laugh burst in her eyes before she formed fish butterfly rain. One word, then two, each one adding color back to her face. Daniel sat opposite, cradling his coffee like a man guarding treasure, only this treasure was the unspoken sounds at Sophie's throat. His phone buzzed. He flipped it face down. The market could wait. His daughter couldn't. "Let's try brave." Lena signed. Sophie leaned in. Lena touched her stomach, drew in a breath, then pushed her hand outward like releasing a sail. "Brave." Sophie followed her small hand, trembling but completing the gesture. Daniel exhaled the breath of blessing. "At my company," he said quietly to Lena, "we had a rule: never let fear drive decisions. I used it to win every game. But with Sophie, I let fear chain me for a year." "You're relearning," Lena signed slowly. "Relearning what? How to be a father in a new language." Friday noon brought a rush, office workers, clinking cups, chatter echoing. Sophie sat small in the center of it, fingers fluttering over the table. Lena started a game. "What bird is this?" She shaped her hands into a beak, then wings. Sophie followed her beak, a little crooked, her wings more like a fan. Lena made a silly face, eyes wide, tongue out, hands flapping like an overheated turkey. Sophie bit her lip. Then it happened. A soft giggle escaped her, brief like a breeze plucking a harp string. She clapped a hand over her mouth, eyes wide as if she'd broken a rule. Daniel's coffee froze mid-air. Time hung like a drop of honey refusing to fall. He turned to her. Memories of her old laughter from before, courtrooms and headlines, and Elena's slammed door flooded back in fast reels. Sophie looked at him, hesitated, then laughed again. longer, clearer. A single sound bounced off porcelain light in his chest. His hand went to his heart as if to keep it from spilling out. His eyes burned. He turned away too late to hide it. Lena said nothing. She only placed her hand on the table near his, close enough to feel far enough to give space. It was enough. He felt it. "Thank you," he murmured. "Don't thank me," she signed. "Thank your daughter." She chose to bloom. Sunday came with rain, the soft Portland kind falling like fingers strumming tin. The cafe was quieter, lamplight turning golden like a hurried love letter. Lena brought Sophie a stack of hand-drawn flashcards, picture on one side sign, and word on the other. "Home sky, safe." "What's safe?" Lena asked in signs. Sophie thought, then hugged her shoulders. "No fear." "Where are you not afraid?" Sophie glanced at the window, then at Daniel, then back to Lena. She drew an invisible circle around the three of them. "Here." Daniel leaned in, afraid to miss a movement. How could a tiny cafe do what a team of specialists could not? Perhaps because safety didn't come from credentials, it came from eyes. His phone buzzed. Harper and Lee, the lawyer. Daniel stepped out to the covered back porch. "Elena's filed to reopen the custody hearing," the lawyer said. "They claim Sophie's current environment lacks professional structure. They'll argue for relocation to Seattle." Daniel pressed against the brick wall. Rain drummed above. In him a silent plea. "Don't take her from where she just learned to laugh. I need time. Hearings in 2 weeks." When he returned, Lena didn't ask. She simply handed him a cloth handkerchief embroidered with 2 small letters, LH. "I've noticed you use your sleeve," she wrote quickly on a slip of paper, her voice unsteady. "Keep this." He took it, small but not small. Boardrooms had taught him to measure value in numbers. This woman measured it in gestures. He tucked it into his inner pocket where his keycard to the executive floor used to be, and knew that in another life, this would be his talisman. By the second week, they weren't strangers in a cafe anymore. They were 3 points on an invisible line. Lena taught Sophie to sign hope by touching her pulse, then releasing her hand like lighting a candle. Sophie copied, eyes bright, as if a flame truly flickered inside. "Let's try something new," Lena said aloud, slowly for Sophie to read her lips. She held a small mirror to her mouth, shaping the silent word, "Mama." Sophie studied her reflection, lips parting. "Ma. Ma." The vowel stretched like breath. Daniel's hand clenched the LH handkerchief. Lena touched Sophie's hand, no pressure. No rush, she signed. "When you're safe, sound will come." They moved on. Lena cupped her hands into a heart. Sophie placed hers inside. Above them, the rain had stopped. Inside them, storms eased. "You make me believe," Daniel said low, "that even if the court rules against me, we'll be okay." Why, Lena's eyes asked. "Because she has her own language now. And because," he faltered, "because we have you." Lena didn't answer right away. She looked at him, not at his name or his bank balance, but at the way he held his daughter's hand. A man who once made markets bow, now lowering his head to the silent music of his child. Suddenly, Sophie signed family, 2 hands clasped into a roof drawn close to her chest. She didn't speak, but her eyes smiled. Daniel froze. The word had never felt so terrifying, or so worth wanting. "Can you laugh out loud?" Lena teased in signs. Sophie nodded. She breathed in, then laughed a little louder, a little longer, enough to turn heads, enough for Mara to smile behind the counter, enough for Daniel to cover his eyes when they filled. Lena leaned back. "Do you hear that?" "Yes," Daniel's voice caught. "The most expensive song I'll ever own." The 3 of them laughed together. On the wall, the clock read 11:11. If they still believed in wishes, now was the time. Daniel, who once mocked omens, wished like a boy. He wished the court would see what was already here. A child who felt safe, a father who had learned again, and a woman who listened with her heart. Have you ever heard a small sound? A laugh, a call that changed the way you saw the world forever? Share it in 1 sentence in the comments. What was that sound and how did it touch you? And if Chapter 2 made you smile or maybe tear up, leave a, so we know the invisible thread just brushed against you too. Chapter 3. The Gift Called Hope. That morning in Portland was as gentle as a lullaby. A veil of mist clung to the rooftops and sunlight slipped between the trees like strands of golden ribbon. Maple and Steam was still quiet. Only the steady sigh of steam from the espresso machine and the mingled scents of cinnamon and melting butter filled the air. Lena had come in earlier than usual. She wanted to prepare the window table with something special, a small vase, a few sprigs of baby's breath, and a napkin folded into the shape of a sail. From behind the counter, Mara raised an eyebrow. Expecting someone special today, Lena just smiled, neither confirming nor denying. She wasn't good at putting into words the feeling growing in her chest, something like light being poured into a glass jar. The bell above the door gave a soft chime. Daniel walked in wearing a deep navy suit, cleanly tailored. It wasn't flashy, but the fit across the shoulders and the modest watch on his wrist spoke of quiet precision, the kind of luxury that came from restraint. Beside him, Sophie held tight to her worn fox plush, scanning the room. When she spotted Lena, she paused for half a heartbeat, then signed their private greeting, 2 fingers to the cheek, her eyes curving in a smile. Sophie slid into her chair. Daniel took the seat across. But before ordering, he set a small blue velvet box on the table. No explanation, just the box silent as a story waiting to be told. "This," Daniel nudged it toward her, "is to say thank you." Lena looked from him to the box. Her hands rested still on the table, a small gesture from someone who'd often turned down kindness out of pride. But Daniel's eyes weren't the eyes of a man bestowing a favor. They were the eyes of someone who had been saved. That difference softened something inside her. She opened it. Inside lay a slender charcoal-colored bracelet with a silver charm engraved with the ASL sign for hope. The lines were as delicate as the tremor of a heartbeat. "I ordered it the first day we met." Daniel said, his voice lowered, as if afraid to break something fragile between them. "They told me it would take 3 days, but I told them this is the kind of order where money can't afford to be late." A faint, self-conscious smile touched his lips. "I'm used to using power to make time move faster." "But..." His gaze drifted to Sophie, tracing circles on the tabletop. "I've learned some things only arrive on time when love and patience lead the way." Lena lifted the bracelet. The cool thread of it rested against her skin, and in the stillness of the morning she felt her own pulse, not in her ears, but in the way the silver charm tapped against her wrist. Hope. A word that once felt distant was suddenly close enough to hold. She almost said, "I can't accept this," but the words caught. Instead, she signed slowly, deliberately. "Thank you for trusting me enough to name something this good." Sophie reached out and touched the charm, her eyes round. She signed hope exactly as Lena had taught her, fingers to her wrist, then opening her hand like letting go of a kite. Daniel watched, his gaze softening. A light breeze slipped past the curtains, carrying with it a fragile warmth. When Lena wore the hope charm, it wasn't just jewelry. It was the moment a child had stepped back from silence. And across from her sat a father who understood that every mansion, private jet, or CEO title meant nothing next to a single short word, hope. She poured strawberry milk for Sophie, set a black coffee before Daniel, then perched on the edge of her seat, still polite, still at a safe distance. The bracelet caught the light in a thin silver flash. "I don't know how to thank you enough," Daniel said, "but there are things money would ruin if placed in the wrong hands. I just wanted to put this where it belongs." "Sometimes thank you is just silence," Lena replied, speaking slowly so he could catch her words. "And staying. Staying." It gave him pause. For 2 years, all he'd done was leave Seattle, leave press rooms, leave curious stares behind. Staying was a verb he hadn't practiced. Sophie tapped the back of Lena's hand, asking for a game. Lena laughed and opened her set of hand-drawn flashcards, Family, Peace, Brave, Sunflower, Ocean. Sophie's favorite was Sunflower. She'd spread her fingers like a small sun turning her wrist, so the flower followed the light. "Why do you like sunflowers?" Daniel asked, imitating Lena's gentle way of posing questions. Sophie thought for a moment, then signed, "Because it always looks toward the light." Daniel tipped his head back and laughed, a real laugh, unrestrained. He snapped a quick photo, Lena and Sophie leaning toward each other, one wearing the hope bracelet, the other making a flower. Sunlight caught on the silver charm, flaring like a tiny declaration. He glanced at the photo, then froze. At the top of the screen, a new email notification glowed, "Re-petition to reopen custody hearing." The subject alone made his palms damp. He locked the phone quickly, fast enough that Lena didn't notice, and slipped it back into his pocket. "What's wrong?" Lena asked, not accusing, just noticing the shift in air. "Just work," Daniel said, smiling in a way that didn't quite reach his eyes. Lena studied him for a beat longer, then let it go. Sometimes trust was leaving someone the right to keep their silence. Being seen didn't mean being examined, it meant being spared from exposure. The bell rang as a group of office workers came in, their trench coats damp with rain, voices bright. Among them was a silver-haired man in a dark tie carrying the sharp scent of cologne. He chose a table near theirs, opened his laptop, and typed with the clatter of gunfire. "Excuse me," he said as Lena passed. "Could you speak up? That thing?" His eyes flicked to her hearing aid. "Makes your voice sound odd." The cafe's warmth dipped a degree. Daniel straightened, CEO instinct flaring. Locate the problem, lock target, strike back. "Hey you," he began. "It's fine," Lena said softly, her hand on the table, not touching him, but enough to lower the wave. She turned to the man wearing the practiced smile of someone long acquainted with bias, soft but unmoved. "Sir, my hearing aid helps me hear you better. And to serve you well, all I need is for you to speak respectfully." Mara's gaze sharpened from behind the counter. The man gave an awkward chuckle, started to make another comment, but stopped at Daniel's unblinking stare and Lena's calm, fearless poise. He muttered an apology and bent to his keyboard. Sophie tugged Lena's sleeve, signing, "You okay?" Lena touched her own nose. "Okay," and added, "Thank you for asking." Daniel's shoulders eased. The wave receded, leaving behind the small footprints of a patient woman and a brave little girl. "You handled that like a master," he murmured. "No." Lena smiled, breath fogging the rim of her cup. "Self-respect is the strongest language I know." The hope bracelet gave a faint ting against the table. Sophie caught the sound in her hands as if afraid it might fall. Not all heartbreaks came as thunderclaps. Sometimes a single careless sentence could split something open. But just as often a calm reply could stitch it back. And here a father learned protecting didn't always mean charging forward. Sometimes it meant trusting that the person you love can stand tall on their own. Late morning edged toward noon. Sunlight replaced rain. Mara dimmed the lamps, letting the natural light flood in. Daniel excused himself to take a call, stepping into the narrow back hallway with a small window to the mossy alley. "Give me a counter-strategy," he told, his lawyer voice back to its boardroom steadiness. "I need proof Sophie's in a safe environment. A language therapist's report, communication progress videos, testimony from direct caregivers. I have video." He looked through the window. Inside, Lena was teaching Sophie to read lips using a pocket mirror. They laughed together, sunlight glancing off the hope charm like a star and a witness. "You sure?" the lawyer asked. Daniel was silent. There was a line between protecting someone and pulling them into a storm. He wasn't ready to tell Lena about the hearing yet, but part of him knew the light she'd brought Sophie was the strongest evidence of all. Back at the table, he chose his words carefully. "I'd like to, if you're okay with it, record a few short videos of Sophie learning to sign. Just little moments." "What for?" Lena asked, not suspicious, only seeking clarity. "To remember," Daniel hesitated, "and to show someone that she's growing up in the light." Lena looked at him, then at Sophie, and nodded. "If it's for the light to be seen, I agree. But only on one condition. Sophie has to say yes first." "Of course," Daniel said instantly, as if signing the most important contract of his life. They filmed brief clips, Sophie signing family, peace, brave, and finally hope. In the last one, Lena's wrist with the silver charm slipped into the frame. Sophie touched it before opening her hand to release an invisible kite. Daniel held the camera steady. He'd filmed countless product launches, but none had ever sent electricity down his spine like this. "Enough," Lena signed, her eyes asking. Enough to keep me alive on a bad day, Daniel said honestly. Some legal documents weren't bound in leather but lived in a child's pupils when she looked at someone she trusted. The camera was only an excuse. The gaze was the proof. As the crowd thinned, Lena led Sophie to the cafe's back garden, a small patio with pots of lavender and a weathered wooden bench. They sat together. Daniel leaned against the doorway, not wanting to disturb the picture. "You know," Lena began softly, speaking slowly for herself, "I used to hate the word hope. It made people wait, and waiting is exhausting. But today..." She lifted her wrist, the charm scattering light at the corner of her eye. "I realized hope isn't standing still. It's taking one small step toward what you believe in." Daniel was quiet for a long time. He felt the LH on the corner of the handkerchief in his pocket, Lena Harper, and understood why a piece of cloth could feel like a compass. He remembered sleepless nights over court documents and statistical odds, the helplessness of watching a market crash you couldn't stop. And then he looked at the two people before him. A young woman with a hearing aid, a child who had just relearned how to laugh and knew he wasn't in the market anymore. He was home. "I'll fight," he said, eyes fixed on them. "No matter what, I know." Lena smiled. "And I'm here. Here." The word returned to the place it was born that morning. Stay. Without thinking, Daniel came forward, sitting on the bench's edge. Sunlight spilled over his shoulder. Sophie placed one small hand on the hope charm, the other on her father's hand, linking them with an invisible thread. Family. She signed her smile round as a sun shower. Lena blinked against the sting of sudden tears, the kind that come to those who've grown used to being strong. She placed her hand over Sophie's, then brushed the back of Daniel's, a small reward for a man who had just said fight with quiet conviction. The invisible thread stretched between them, not tight enough to hurt, but warm enough to hold. "I'll wear it every day," Lena whispered, touching the charm, "to remember that we chose light even when the sky turns gray." Daniel nodded. He almost told her about the petition, about the storm gathering beyond the horizon, but sometimes speaking too soon was like switching on a harsh light over a photograph that was perfectly lit. He swallowed the words, choosing instead to trust in something he once thought irrational. When the time comes, the right words will find themselves. Suddenly, Sophie leapt up, arms wide like sails running circles around the lavender pots. She let out a joyful whoop so bright it startled the sparrows from the telephone wire. Daniel and Lena both looked up, and in that moment, they weren't a CEO and a waitress. They were two adults on a weathered wooden bench watching their child run under the sun. On Lena's wrist, the hope charm caught the light shining, like a thank you, turned into something you could see. Have you ever given or received a small gift that changed the course of your day or your life? Share it in one sentence in the comments. What was it and why did it touch you? And if the hope on Lena's wrist warmed you even a little, leave the word hope and an emoji, so we know this chapter found its way to you. Chapter 4. The Family Portrait. Portland rain fell in threads so fine they seemed to stitch together the cracks of the afternoon. On the narrow street between a laundromat and a shuttered bookstore, the neon vacancy sign at the Roseway Motel flickered bright again. The iron stairway groaned under each step, and the hallway carried the faint scent of old carpet and cheap cleaning solution. Room 203 was where Daniel and Sophie were staying for now, a world contained within two single beds, a tiny kitchenette, a fridge that hummed like a restless insect, and a window that looked out onto a moss-covered brick wall. Daniel sat at the scarred wooden table, running his thumb along the edge of a worn file folder. On top was a document stamped with cold, flat-type petition to reopen custody hearing. Under the yellow light of the desk lamp, the word custody cast a shadow across the page like a bruise. He had read it enough times to know every comma by heart. On the bed, Sophie lined up her colored pencils, red, yellow, blue, green, a quiet ritual she always performed before drawing. 3 soft knocks came at the door. Daniel startled, then relaxed when he recognized the rhythm. He opened it to find Lena standing there, a thin raincoat over her shoulders, hair damp with scattered raindrops, holding an oversized sketchbook and a tin of pencils so full it looked like summer had been packed inside. The silver hope charm on her wrist caught the hallway light flashing like a stray star. "Good evening," she said slowly, clearly, so he could hear with both his ears and his eyes. Sophie ran to the door before Daniel could answer. She stopped just inside the threshold, raised her hands to sign their private hello eyes, curving into a crescent moon smile. Lena crouched to meet her gaze, pressing her fingertips lightly into Sophie's palm. Their secret, "I'm here." In that moment, the room gained the scent of new paper-shaved wood and the feeling of someone pulling a thick blanket up to your shoulders. "Would you mind if—" Lena gestured toward the little table. "No," Daniel replied quicker than he meant to. "This place could use more color." He slid a stack of legal papers into the drawer, shutting them away like a storm locked behind a flimsy door. Lena laid the sketchbook on the table, opening the box to reveal pencils sharpened to fine points, like tiny arrows pointing forward. "Today we'll draw feelings," she told Sophie, speaking and signing at once. "Pick one color for peace, one for worry, and one for hope." Sophie thought for a moment, then chose blue for peace, gray for worry, and yellow, the yellow of sunflowers, for hope. Daniel stared at the three pencils side by side, exhaling quietly. No boardroom in the world had ever given him such a distilled definition. Outside, the rain thinned. Inside, the pencils skated across paper, their sound weaving a kind of music. "Draw the place where you feel safe," Lena suggested, sliding a tissue next to Sophie to keep her hands dry, a small, loving habit from someone who noticed the details that mattered. Sophie began with a slightly lopsided heart on the left side of the page, filling it with a pale yellow that trembled with each stroke. Beside it, she drew a tall figure, round head, broad shoulders, long hands, Daniel. She gave him a modest smile, neither wide nor small, and added a green dot over his chest. A heart inside a heart. She looked at Lena for a long moment, then drew a smaller figure with long hair and a tiny silver dot on one ear. She used a white pencil for the dot, so it only caught the light if you tilted the page, a detail so subtle it was almost funny in its accuracy. Lena laughed, covering her mouth. Daniel pressed a hand to his chest. To him, that small silver mark glowed like a star pinned to a map. "And you?" Lena asked. Sophie drew a figure in between, shorter than Daniel, taller than Lena, with messy hair holding an orange fox plush. She colored the shirt blue peace and added 2 yellow dots for eyes hope. Then she connected all 3 figures with a loop of golden arms, starting from Daniel's hand through Sophie's to Lena's and back again. "We're holding hands," Sophie signed, smiling her lips, shaping silent words. Daniel wanted to say something, but his throat locked. He had seen intricate network diagrams with nodes, arrows, and weighted lines, but his daughter's simple golden loop was the most perfect algorithm he'd ever encountered. No further explanation was needed. "The heart should be bigger," Lena suggested gently, "because love usually grows when there's room." Sophie nodded, widening the heart, filling it with richer yellow. Then she paused, turning to Daniel. "You color too." It was an invitation he'd waited a year to hear. He took the pencil, his fingers trembling slightly. He colored slowly, afraid that pressing too hard might tear the paper. Strangely, that hesitation carried the tenderness of a man who'd once signed contracts that could set stock prices on fire. Lena watched father and daughter color together, her eyes stinging. The hope bracelet brushed the tabletop with a faint ting, a sound so small only someone truly listening would notice. When the drawing was nearly finished, Daniel's phone vibrated. Harper and Lee. He silenced it, flipped it face down. Sophie noticed. A flicker of worry passed through her eyes. Lena placed her hand over Sophie's, signing. "It's okay. We're drawing." "Sorry," Daniel said quietly, guilt in his tone. "Work." Lena met his gaze, neither scolding nor offering empty comfort. "Are there things in your pocket that aren't work?" She asked, her words as soft as setting something down, not pushing. Daniel lowered his head, running a hand through his hair. Some questions were doors you only had to turn the handle for a long-closed room to open. The hearing might come sooner. They say Sophie's environment lacks professional structure. They want to take her back to Seattle. The word Seattle hit the floor like a dropped weight. Sophie stopped coloring, watching them, tilting her head the way she did when she couldn't hear clearly. "Can I stay?" Sophie signed. Daniel had to swallow twice before answering. "I'll do everything I can." Lena was quiet for a beat, then flipped to a clean page. She drew a flower growing out of a crack. "What do you see?" she asked Sophie. "Broken ground. But a flower grows." "Right. Cracks aren't just damage, they're where the light gets in." Lena set the flower drawing next to the family portrait. The edges touched like two shoulders leaning. If someone asks, "Where is Sophie growing up?" Lena looked at Daniel. "We show them these 2 pages." Daniel smiled faintly. Gratitude and regret mixed in his eyes. "I wanted to protect you from every storm," he admitted. "But maybe your light was made for the rain." "No." Lena shook her head, her gaze steady but kind. "Light is made to stand next to whoever's shaking. And tonight, it's not Sophie." The words moved through him like warmth, without the ache. He set his palm open on the table, a wordless request. Lena didn't take it, but she placed hers close enough for their warmth to mingle far enough to respect a man still learning to ask for help. Sophie gathered the pencils, then pulled the sketchbook toward her. She placed the family picture on top and in careful, uneven letters wrote, "We are safe." She didn't ask how to spell it. She remembered safe from Lena's lesson. The letters leaned and wobbled, but somehow they stood tall. She held it up to Daniel first. His lips trembled. "You're my home," he said, then signed the word home so she could see. Then Sophie carried it to Lena, tilting her head, a silent invitation. Lena touched the paper's corner like she was handling a freshly printed passport. Her eyes glistened joy and fear in equal measure. Joy at being invited and fear because accepting meant she was bound not to disappear when needed. "Can you—" Sophie signed slowly, glancing at Daniel for approval. "Stay." Daniel looked at Lena. They both knew Sophie's question wasn't just for tonight, it was for many nights ahead. The future had no map, but a heart had just drawn a road. "If you both agree." Lena said softly, but clearly, "I agree." Daniel answered instantly, then corrected himself with a smile. "Dad agrees." Sophie placed the drawing on the bed, climbed into the middle, and patted the empty spaces on each side. Lena sat to her left, Daniel to her right. Sophie pulled their hands together, aligning the yellow loop on the paper with the real loop of their joined hands, Daniel's, Sophie's, Lena's. No words, just a circle closed. Silence followed, not the silence of worry, but the silence of touch. The wall clock ticked. The fridge hummed. The rain had stopped. In the center of a budget motel room, 3 people held each other. No glittering promises, no grand vows, just skin to skin, heart to heart. The hope bracelet cooled against Daniel's hand, an anchor holding him steady in the storm. He drew a deep, slow breath, chest rising to meet Sophie's small back. She rested her ear over his heartbeat, eyes closing. Lena lowered her cheek onto Sophie's hair, the scent of child shampoo catching in her throat. In Daniel's mind, the numbers, schedules, and strategies moved to the back row. In the front row, there was only warmth. He finally understood something no CEO manual had ever taught: some decisions are right, not because the logic is perfect, but because when you reach out, someone takes your hand. When Sophie drifted to sleep on top of the drawing, Daniel and Lena gently slid the paper onto her pillow. On the white page, 3 figures linked by a yellow loop rested under the words, "We are safe." Lena pulled the blanket over Sophie, then stood by the window. Outside, the streetlights scattered amber patches across the puddles. Daniel stood beside her, close enough to feel her warmth, far enough to remain polite. "Thanks for coming," Daniel said. "Before you walked in this room was just shelter from the rain. Now it feels like a station where you wait for the right train. And when the train comes, will you get on?" she asked. "If you two are on it," he said, eyes on the drawing. I won't stay behind. They stood in quiet a little longer. Lena touched the hope charm tracing the ASL engraving like a prayer bead. Would you let me make a copy of the drawing, she asked. I want to hang one in the cafe at the window table. So every morning, Sophie sees where she belongs. Of course, Daniel nodded. And I'll take a copy to court. The words fell between them, not like a stone to make ripples, but like an anchor. Lena turned to him, no hesitation left. Then let me come with you. Not because the court needs an interpreter, because Sophie needs someone beside her. Daniel opened his mouth ready to say storm media risk, but remembered the crack and the flower. He just nodded slow and certain. Together. Lena packed the pencils, closed the sketchbook, and stuck a note to the cover. Family isn't where you're born, it's where you're heard. She set it on the table so Daniel would see it in the morning before fear could drag him up. She stepped to the door. Daniel followed, stopping at the threshold. They faced each other a half step apart. Neither hurried. In the last quiet moment, Lena raised her hand, signing one word, slow, clear eyes, steady. Here. Then she smiled and left. The door closed, leaving behind the scent of rain and a paper shield on the pillow. Daniel sat beside his daughter, touching the word, safe. He knew that tomorrow, when the sharp questions came, he could open his phone and show them this drawing. But tonight he didn't need a screen. He had the real thing. He lay down, arm around Sophie, eyes resting on the words once more, before closing. Somewhere between waking and sleep, he saw the three of them walking toward the light at the end of a hallway, each step falling into the same rhythm. Have you ever held onto a drawing, a note, or a small object as your own shield while life's storm still raged? Share it in 2 sentences in the comments. What was it? And how did it keep you standing if We Are Safe touched you too? Leave the words safe so we'll know you were heard here as well. Chapter 5. The Legal Shadow. Portland's morning had a crisp edge. The wind swept down the avenue, tossing dry maple leaves into small spirals before slipping through the narrow gap beneath the maple and steam door. The bell chimed softly. The espresso machine breathed in steady intervals, and the warm scent of cinnamon blended with fresh-baked butter like a blanket for anyone just pulling their hands from their coat pockets. Lena polished the window table, their table, as if she were cleaning a lens before looking at someone's heart. The hope bracelet on her wrist caught the light in a glint as thin as a shooting star. From behind the counter, Mara set down a tray of fresh waffles, throwing her a sidelong glance, half teasing, half serious. That table's starting to look like the VIP seat in a CEO love story. Not VIP. Lena smiled. Safe. The bell rang again. Daniel walked in with a sharpness that bordered on rigid midnight blue suit, white shirt, dark tie. A metal watch peeked from beneath his cuff, nothing flashy, just certain. To a stranger, he could have stepped straight from a boardroom carrying the discipline of quarterly reports. But Lena only had to glance once to notice the fatigue at the corners of his eyes, the kind that didn't come from lack of sleep but from bracing for an incoming blow. Sophie trailed close, clutching her fox plush hair tied high. The moment she saw Lena, her hands flashed a greeting, then quickly, "Learn new word today," Lena laughed. Always sunshine. They settled in. Lena set down strawberry milk and banana bread for Sophie, black coffee for Daniel. He touched the cup as if it were a ritual to steady his courage. All morning he'd rehearsed what to say, and all the words had scattered. "Lena," he began, voice low with a tremor at the end. "I need to tell you something." About Sophie's mother. The cafe's air seemed to thin slightly, like someone had dimmed a light. Lena didn't rush him. She shifted her chair just enough so the light fell across his face, as if translating the expression he hadn't yet spoken. "She's filed to reopen the custody hearing. They're saying I took Sophie out of a structured environment." Daniel swallowed. "They want to force us back to Seattle. Soon." Seattle landed on the table like something heavy. Sophie looked up. She didn't understand it all, but she could feel the adult's temperature shift. Lena tapped her fingers gently on the table, signing to Sophie safe. "We're together." Then she turned back to Daniel, speaking slowly, as if to let each word find its place. "You're not alone." It was a simple sentence, but it slipped into the locked space inside him. Daniel exhaled long. He'd walked away from glass towers with his name on them, from press conferences, from every open door. Today, at a small wooden table by a window, he cracked one open, and the air wasn't as cold as he'd feared. When Lena said, "You're not alone," the hum of the espresso machine sounded like a human heartbeat. Here, without lawyers or judges, a different verdict was passed. From this point forward, fear would not walk alone. Mara refilled their water and set a local paper on the table. On page 2, a small piece read, "Visual artist Elena Taylor returns to Seattle after touring. Sources say she may be considering making amends." No mention of Daniel, no picture of Sophie, just enough words to cast a shadow. Daniel skimmed it and pinned the page down with his palm as if to keep the wind from catching it. Lena noticed the whitened knuckles. She imagined the cold courtrooms ahead, the sharp questions, the measuring eyes. She wanted to offer something strong. But the strongest thing now wasn't, "You'll win." The strongest thing was being here. Today, Lena turned to Sophie, voice bright, as if changing the subject. "We'll learn a phrase, 'I am safe.'" She wrote it on paper in bold letters, signing as she spoke. Sophie repeated it, head-tilted lips shaping it without sound. On the third try, she let a faint sound escape at the end of safe. Daniel heard it. That small sound pricked his eyes. Why teach her that, he asked, unable to hide the gray cloud of worry. "So Sophie can tell it to herself," Lena said. "In a courtroom, in her sleep, waiting in a hallway. When no one hears, she'll still be heard." Daniel set his hand in the center of the table. A moment passed. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box, not blue like before, but charcoal. Inside was a tiny silver charm engraved with the word "safe," made to hook onto the hope bracelet. "I don't know how to fight without pulling others into the wind," he said. "But if the wind's coming, I want to anchor something to your wrist." He paused, voice dropping. "You gave us hope. The rest, let me carry." Lena wasn't ready for that. "You gave us hope" went straight into the place she'd fortified for years. Warmth rose to her eyes, spilling down her throat. She nodded, afraid speaking would break her. Daniel walked around to her side, his hand trembling slightly as he clipped the safe charm onto the hope bracelet. The clasp clicked shut with the quiet sound of a promise locking in place. Sophie tapped her small hand on the table in a gentle beat, smiling safe. Some gifts aren't measured by size or weight, they're a single word on a piece of silver. And when it rests against your pulse, you wear the heartbeat of 3 people, yours, his, the child's. Messages buzzed into Daniel's phone, media inquiry. Elena's statement, coming court date tentative. He silenced it but couldn't mute the glances from nearby tables, quick scanning looks like x-rays. A young woman nudged her friend, whispering, "Isn't that Carter Tech?" The friend shrugged. "Looks like him. Cheap coffee for a billionaire CEO?" Lena heard it, but didn't react. She brought a small chalkboard from the counter and wrote, "Love is a language you feel." She set it right on their table. It wasn't a rebuttal, it was a definition placed between the stairs. "You used to win by controlling the narrative," Daniel murmured with a self-deprecating smile. "But here, the story tells itself when Sophie smiles. Here, the truth doesn't need reporters," Lena replied. "It just needs someone who stays." Sophie tugged Lena's hand, whispering with her fingers, 3-word story game. They played. Lena signed window, rain, safe. Daniel signed Sophie, laugh, light. Sophie signed Lena, dad, home. Daniel froze slightly when home landed on the table. He looked at his daughter, then at Lena, like someone who'd just seen coordinates appear on a map. A passing customer bumped Sophie's arm, tilting her strawberry milk. Lena caught it in time, not a drop spilled. The customer stammered an apology. Daniel half rose, but Sophie beat him to it, signing slowly, "It's okay, we are safe." Then she went back to the game. Daniel sat back, heart quickened but soft. "We are safe," plural. An invisible shield had just been handed to a child who knew how to hold it. Maybe the first victory wouldn't happen in a courtroom, it was here in a strawberry milk that didn't spill. When a child can steady herself in her own language, the day has already tilted toward you. Lena asked Mara for the small back table behind the counter, the one beneath a wall of postcards from customers. They sat. Daniel opened his leather case, arranging items like chess pieces, video of Sophie's progress in communication, testimony from her daily caregiver Mara volunteered, letters from the community center where Lena ran free sign language classes for kids, report from the speech therapist appointment already booked, draft of an individualized education plan IEP he was prepared to fund. I know the law runs on logic. Daniel said, his CEO tone switched on but not cold. But the focus is the child. We have to make them see Sophie, not just read about her. Then let Sophie touch their hearts, Lena said. I'll sit right behind her, translate each sign exactly, no more, no less. And if she freezes, I'll place one finger on her hand. Our sign for I'm here. Daniel looked at her, eyes brightening as if someone had flipped a switch in the dark. Could you be listed as Sophie's primary companion in the record, not for credit, just to name what's already true? If Sophie says yes, Lena replied, I don't take from anyone. I stand beside. Sophie came in holding the We Are Safe drawing in a plastic sleeve. She placed it in the center of the table like a flag before battle. Daniel grinned. The commander has arrived. They practiced courtroom calm, Daniel breathing deep for 4 counts, Lena signing safe. Sophie placing her hand over her heart, 3 motions in sync. The first try was awkward. By the third, it clicked like a well-made mechanism. Daniel thought if his company had rituals, this simple and effective half their meetings would have been unnecessary. No armor, no speeches, just a laminated drawing, a fingertip on a child's hand, and 3 breaths in unison. That was the plan. Before leaving, Daniel sent Sophie to browse the children's bookshelf. He stayed with Lena by the window. Midday light spilled thin over the safe charm, now clasped to the hope bracelet. When I was at the top, he said, eyes on the street, I thought I could buy time, hire more staff to move faster, pay extra for overnight shipping, pour money into PR to fast-forward public opinion. He turned to her, voice low. Turns out the important things can't be rushed. The road back to Sophie's laughter, and he paused, smiling faintly. The road back to myself. Both started with you. Lena didn't dodge it this time. She let the words move through her, shaking the suspension bridge between doubt and belief. The water in her eyes rose a notch. I just stayed, she said softly. You're the one who walked into the storm. Because you left a light at the door, Daniel replied. And if I lose my way tomorrow, I'll look at your wrist. He touched the bracelet lightly, not quite touching her skin. Hope gives me direction. Safe gives me reason. Sophie came running back, holding a picture book titled The Loudest Silence. The 3 words made them laugh. Lena pulled her close. Daniel wrapped an arm around them both. No hesitation now. A few customers glanced over. Someone smiled. Maple and Steam seemed a degree warmer. Before goodbye, Daniel said the sentence he'd been practicing all morning but only now truly meant, you gave us hope. Lena swallowed. She nodded. To keep from breaking, she signed just 2 words. I'm here. Where Daniel asked, testing her. She traced a loop in the air from him to Sophie to herself. Here. They stepped apart like boats easing from the dock. Outside, the wind was less sharp. Inside, the legal shadow still waited, but there was light. Have you ever had someone say a simple sentence that became your anchor in a storm? Share that sentence in the comments, because maybe today your words could anchor someone else. Chapter 6. Words before the court. The county courthouse sat on a street paved with gray stone, the trees lining the walkway having already lost more than half their leaves. Inside, the white fluorescent light swallowed every trace of warmth. The tiled floor felt as cold as a pool of water. The hallway echoed with the click of heels, the rustle of papers, and breaths held deliberately low. On the wooden plaque, the gold-lettered words, Family Courtroom 3, gleamed with a kind of chill. Daniel stood before the door and drew a long breath. The navy suit wrapped around him like armor, yet his hands that had once signed contracts shaking the graphs of global markets were damp with sweat. To his left, Sophie adjusted her hair tie, the worn ear of her stuffed fox catching the light. To his right, Lena lifted her wrist slightly, the hope charm tapping against the safe charm with a soft click, like a gentle summons. "We're here." "Remember 3 breaths," Lena said slowly, so both father and daughter could hear with their eyes. "In, hold, out." Daniel nodded, giving a faint smile as if to say, "I'm fine." But they both knew fine was a verb today, something they had to make happen together. The door opened. The courtroom was like a large wooden box. The judge's bench raised a step higher, the national emblem hanging directly behind it. The public seating stretched along both sides. In the center, the counsel tables. The chair reserved for a minor sat lower than the rest, upholstered in moss-green fabric, small, almost adrift like a lone boat in the middle of a frozen lake. Elena sat on the other side. Not the glamorous figure from the magazine covers, but one polished to severity. Black dress hair in a tight bun, a face honed to calm by years before the camera. Her gaze brushed over Sophie, pausing for less than a second, then rested on Daniel a heartbeat longer, long enough to show the resolve of someone unwilling to lose. The clerk's bell rang. Everyone stood. The judge, a silver-haired woman with sharp eyes behind thin glasses, stepped up to the bench. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of someone who had heard too many broken stories. "This hearing is reconvened to determine the best interests of the minor Sophie Carter. Proceed." Daniel placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. A small gesture, but trembling. Lena sat directly behind Sophie as planned. Her back straight, hands on her lap, palms open so the girl could turn and see her at any time. In a place where everything had rules, one thing refused to be framed: the way a child's eyes sought the person who made her feel safe. Sophie turned her head, met Lena's eyes, and nodded, just a tiny nod to herself. Elena's attorney rose first, a man with a deep red tie, his voice polished smooth. He delivered the well-rehearsed lines of his trade. "Your Honor, my client is the biological mother, formerly the primary caregiver. This child has been," he glanced briefly at Daniel, "taken away from a stable educational environment. We have evidence that she is currently living in a motel and being cared for by a person not related by blood." His eyes flicked to Lena, and without any formal medical qualifications. Each word fell to the floor like cold coins. Daniel kept his chin-level eyes darkening. Lena didn't look at the lawyer. She looked at Sophie. Because she knew the words were for the adults. The truth only needed to be felt by the one who mattered most. The attorney produced photos of the motel's parking lot, a peeling hallway, an old refrigerator with rust stains. He spoke of structure rehabilitation, standardized interventions, as though reading from a manual. Then he sat satisfied with the vice of logic he'd set in place. Daniel's attorney stood. He said, less, his tone not polished but steady. "We submit video recordings of Sophie's communication progress over the last 6 weeks, confirmation of her participation in a community sign language group, and a letter from the café owner where the child found a safe environment for the court's review." He didn't mention the motel didn't defend peeling walls. He spoke about the laminated drawing, "We are safe," placed before the judge. In the white light, 3 figures held hands in a golden ring, like an unspoken sentence. The judge looked up. "I want to hear from the child, if she is willing." Daniel leaned down. "Sweetheart." Sophie nodded. She stood, not holding anyone's hand, and walked toward the small chair in the center. Lena rose with her, signaling silently to the clerk. The judge gave a nod. "You may stand beside her to interpret." Lena inhaled. Her hands that had carried trays, folded napkins, drawn flashcards, would now be her voice. She stood beside Sophie, tilting slightly so her eyes were lower than the girl's, keeping every choice in the child's hands. When Lena rested one finger lightly on Sophie's hand, her signal for "I'm here," the child was no longer just an image in a case file. She was flesh, hair, eyes, breath, and a small, bright will. "What is your name?" the judge asked, her voice softening. Sophie didn't look at the judge. She looked at Lena. Her small hands began to move. "My name is Sophie. I'm 6.5. I like sunflowers. Lena interpreted word for word, keeping the pace. No more, no less. She was a bridge. Sophie, do you feel comfortable where you are now? The judge asked next. Sophie's hands slowed as if listening to her heart before answering. Then she signed. My place smells like cinnamon. It has big windows. There is space for laughing. I am not afraid. She is speaking about the café where she often communicates, Lena translated. She calls it her safe place. The judge's eyes flicked briefly to Elena, then to Daniel. The room was so still, the rustle of the court reporter's pages was audible. Sophie, do you want to talk about your parents? Sophie swallowed once. She turned to Daniel first. For a moment, she wanted to run to him like every time she was scared. But Lena's finger touched her hand again, light as water. Here. Sophie stayed. My dad listens with his eyes. He learned signs to say, did you have breakfast? And what did you dream? He lets me be slow and still waits. Lena's voice softened on the word wait. Daniel lowered his head, his chest tightening as though a cord had been pulled. A tear escaped the corner of his eye, quick, silent. And your mother, the judge asked, perfectly neutral. Sophie turned toward Elena. The whole room leaned in a single breath. She signed slowly, eyes never leaving the woman's face. Sophie searched for a word, is beautiful. She paints. She is busy. I cannot hear her. I am afraid. Lena interpreted. No comment, no inflection. She wasn't on either side, she was with Sophie. Where do you want to be? The question came sooner than anyone expected. Sophie lifted her face. Her hands drew a circle around her chest as if embracing herself. Then she signed, I want to be with Dad and Lena. There I feel like myself. The only sound then was Daniel's breath breaking for a moment. He leaned on the table, lowered his head, letting a second tear fall onto his hand. The man who once gripped countless reins of power now let go of just one, the one holding back his tears, and felt lighter. Thank you, Sophie, the judge said. Do you want to say anything else? Sophie looked at Lena. Lena didn't nod or shake her head. She gave the choice back to the child. Sophie bit her lip, then spoke her first audible word in over a year, small as a tiny bell. Lena. The room stilled. Elena flinched, her hands tightening in her lap. Daniel's head snapped up as if pulled by an invisible string. Sophie continued in signs. She helps me talk. She doesn't push me. She lets me be slow. Lena translated, her throat thick but her voice steady, because today the bridge couldn't collapse. That name from the lips of a child after a year of silence, it wasn't a call. It was a lifeline thrown from the far shore. And the father on this shore broke into tears not out of weakness, but because he had finally reached land. Elena's lawyer rose, adapting quickly. Your Honor, we respect the child's opinion, but please note, children can be influenced by their environment. A new figure. A quick glance at Lena can skew emotional responses. He turned to Sophie. Do you remember your mother holding you on nights you had a fever? The painting she made for you. You don't remember because you were too young. Elena sat straight, her eyes shining. She spoke for the first time in the hearing. Sophie, I want to try again. I know I was wrong. Sophie stared for a long time. She didn't sign. She placed her hand on her own wrist as if checking her pulse, then opened it, signing hope. The room was puzzled for a second. Lena interpreted, she says, hope is being where I am me. Daniel's lawyer requested the video be shown. The screen lit up, Sophie learning the signs for family, peace, and hope at the Maple and Steam Cafe's window table. Sunlight catching on Lena's silver charm. Sophie's laughter mingling with the clink of spoons on cups. No one spoke. The light in the footage spoke for itself. The judge asked to speak with Sophie privately, only with the clerk and interpreter present. Lena looked at Daniel. He nodded. Go ahead, I'm here. Sophie held Lena's hand in the narrow hallway, whispering with her fingers, I'm a little scared. Scared is okay. Lena signed back because you're not alone. Sophie entered the room. The door closed. Daniel leaned against the wall, eyes shut. In his mind flashed boardrooms of glass courtroom battles strung tight as wire speeches drafted to perfection. He smiled. None of it was useful to a 6-year-old's heart. The only things that mattered now were a man who knew when to cry and a woman who knew how to place one finger on the back of a child's hand. The door opened. Sophie came out, not hugging, not crying. She lifted Lena's wrist and tapped the safe charm once, like pressing a save button. No grand breakdown, no declarations. A child touched the word safe and 3 people had crossed the bridge. Back in the courtroom, the judge wrote a few lines, then looked up. The court will recess briefly before delivering a preliminary temporary order. Before we adjourn, I will say this to the adults in the room. There is evidence not found on paper. It's in the way a child breathes easily when sitting next to someone. She struck the gavel. Adjourned. The air in the room seemed to unseal. Elena stared out the window, her shoulders sinking slightly, the posture of someone who had heard something hard to hear. Her lawyer murmured, likely calculating a dignified retreat. On this side, Daniel exhaled. He turned to Lena. His voice broke for a beat, then returned. Thank you. Not for speaking for her, but for not speaking over her. Lena smiled. She already has her voice. I'm just the bridge. Sophie slipped between them as if by habit, holding both their hands and pulling them close. On Lena's wrist, Hope and Safe touched, flashing a thin band of light. Daniel saw it and understood whatever the gavel decided, this light had already won the most important battle, the one against silence. He bent to kiss Sophie's hair, a kiss not to claim, not to conquer, but to say, I see you. When he rose, his eyes were still wet. Lena handed him a handkerchief. He laughed when he saw it was embroidered LH. Strange how a man once obsessed with risk management now felt safest with a piece of cloth in his hand. They stepped into the hallway. The late sun poured through the tall windows, laying thin ribbons of light across the steps. Daniel held his daughter's hand, and with the other, without thinking, purely by instinct, he touched the back of Lena's hand. Not gripping, just resting there. Lena didn't hold back, but she didn't pull away either. It was a wordless agreement. Far off, the bell from another courtroom rang. Life outside still roared. But here in these 10 sunlit steps, silence had changed its meaning. It was no longer the absence of a voice, but the place where a voice had just been found. Have you ever trembled when you had to say the most important thing in a room that wasn't warm? Write one sentence in the comments what you said or wish you had said. Chapter 7. Victory. The late afternoon at the county courthouse was wrapped in a cold, steel-like light. The towering glass doors reflected a gray sky, the people passing by reduced to silhouettes. Inside, the long hallway smelled of fresh paper and ink, the sound of shoes against stone tiles forming the steady rhythm of bureaucracy. In front of Family Courtroom 3, Daniel leaned against the wall, fingers loosely holding the embroidered cloth handkerchief, with the letters LH, a small object yet like a compass needle keeping him from drifting. Sophie clutched her stuffed fox, resting her head lightly against her father's side. Lena stood to his right, the hope bracelet with its safe charm glinting under the light. She extended her hand, not touching, just opening her palm toward them, a harbor for 2 boats at anchor. 3 breaths, Lena said slowly, so both could hear with their eyes. In, hold, out. Daniel followed. Sophie did too. 3 chests, small, medium, large, rose and fell in unison like 3 notes tuning together before the orchestra begins. The door opened. The clerk called their names. They stepped inside. The courtroom was still the same wooden box from that morning, but the light had shifted longer, slanting as though the clock had just passed an invisible milestone. Daniel squeezed his daughter's hand. Lena walked behind each step, translating silent reassurance here, here, here. The public seating now held a few more faces, a local reporter in the back row, a middle-aged couple watching with quiet curiosity. Across the aisle, Elena was already seated. She didn't look at Daniel, her gaze fixed on the national emblem above the judge's bench as if trying to place herself into a larger order so she wouldn't collapse. The judge entered. The gavel struck. This session will continue. As everyone rose, Daniel suddenly remembered that first morning at Maple and Steam when Sophie laughed out loud. He realized the light today might be cold, but it was still light. And on his left, there was now a small hand that knew how to hold on by itself. Daniel's lawyer asked to make the final statement. He didn't open a laptop or shuffle through thick stacks of paper. He simply lifted the laminated drawing "We are safe" and placed it before the court. "Your Honor," he said, voice calm rather than loud. Over the past 6 weeks, Sophie has regained her ability to communicate, her smile, and her sense of safety. We are not asking the court to trust the words of adults. We are asking the court to trust the words of the child herself. He gestured to the screen video footage of Sophie signing "Family, Hope, and Peace" by the cafe window. The frame froze on the moment the hope charm caught the light. This evidence is enough for a heart to weigh. Elena's lawyer stood pulling out a prepared petition. He could have spoken of structure schooling, professional rehabilitation, but the morning had already stripped away his satisfaction. The eyes in the room could no longer be swayed by polished rhetoric. He kept it short, reserved the right to appeal, and sat down. Elena asked to say one thing. The judge nodded. Her voice dry like shoes. Too new to have been broken in. I want to be a mother. A simple sentence. No jeweled rhetoric. It passed through the air, fell to the floor, and didn't shatter, just stayed there. Daniel bowed his head. He understood that some wishes arrive late. Late doesn't mean wrong, but it can't trade places with yesterday. The judge set her pen down and sat in silence long enough for everyone to hear the paper breathe. Then she looked up. The court has considered the child's opinion the evidence of communication, progress, emotional stability, and the safety of the current environment. In the best interests of Sophie Carter, the court grants full custody to Mr. Daniel Carter. The gavel struck. Once, twice, 3 times. Each beat loosened a knot in Daniel's chest. Elena froze for half a second, then rose. She didn't look back. Her steps were firm, her shoulders heavy, but her chin stayed level. The door closed behind her with a strangely gentle sound, as though the final punctuation had been chosen as a period, not a question mark. There were no fireworks in the decision, but in Daniel's ears, it rang like a hymn of salvation. He turned to his daughter, the child no longer trembling, and behind them stood a woman who wasn't her mother but stood there with a mother's heart. Sophie looked at her hands, checking if they shook. They didn't. She turned to Lena. Without needing an invitation, Lena stepped forward, keeping just 1 breath's distance. Sophie lifted both hands, signing "Family." 2 hands joined to form a roof, then pulled toward her chest, as if embracing a space now made solid. The air around the sign softened, like silk laid over the cold edge of the law. Lena signed it back perfectly, mirroring every curve. On her wrist, "Hope" and "Safe" touched, casting 2 tiny points of light into Sophie's eyes. Daniel stepped forward, kneeling to his daughter's level, wrapping both of them in his arms, a hug that promised no oceans, just the ground beneath their feet. "My daughter," he said, voice hoarse from tears already spent. "Let's go home." Sophie nodded, a tiny sound escaping her lips like wind brushing a bell. Home. Lena didn't speak. She placed her palm on Sophie's back, right over the wing-like curve of her shoulder blade, and held it there. From that distance, she could hear the breathing of 2 people, 2 rhythms now landing on the same beat. Mara, sitting in the back like family, wiped her eyes, mouthing "Thank you." The reporter lowered his camera and took no more shots, as if he understood the best picture was the one his own eyes were seeing. Daniel's lawyer stepped back, exhaling the rare relief of his profession. Today he hadn't just won an argument. A child had won the right to be herself. In that embrace, Daniel suddenly saw his old peaks of glory, the ringing of the stock exchange, the deal closed, emails fall silent. Only one word echoed now: family. Not as a noun, but as a verb, an action to be lived each day. They stepped into the hallway. The late sun poured through the high windows, scattering golden dust like powder. Elena stood further away near the elevator. Hearing the door open, she turned, saw the 3 holding hands. For a moment, her eyes softened in a way no one admits in public. Then she turned away, pressed the elevator button, and stepped inside. The doors closed without a sound. Daniel stood still, He felt no triumph over an opponent. He felt like someone who had set down a suitcase after a long journey. "I'll send her updates about Sophie," he said quietly, half to Lena, half to himself. "Not to justify anything, just so she knows." "That's kind," Lena replied. She knew kindness was the only bridge left between shores that didn't want to meet. Sophie pulled them toward the courthouse steps where the sunlight pooled. She sat on the third step, placed her stuffed fox on her lap, and tilted her face up to drink in the light. "Dad," she signed, "take a family photo." Daniel laughed, a light bottle cap pop of a laugh after thirst. He raised his phone, hiding the slight tremor in his hand. Lena tucked her hair behind her ear fingers, brushing the hope charm. Sophie pressed her hand to Lena's wrist, giving the safe charm a little click, like pressing a save button. A small click sounded not from the phone, but from a moment locking into place. The photo appeared on screen sunlight like milk, three faces close together, small hands threaded through larger ones, and a tiny flash of silver on Lena's wrist. Daniel looked at it for a long time, then sent it to a new folder titled Home. They sat there a while longer, no one speaking. On a day that began with arguments, the afternoon ended in silence, the kind that had a heartbeat. Some goodbyes don't need storms or tears, just an unspoken look that says, "I have seen, and I bow to the child's happiness." The elevator doors had closed, and the three of them knew the battle had shifted into a journey. The shadows were longer by the time they returned to Maple and Steam. The bell over the door chimed like it had been waiting. Mara rushed out from behind the counter, scooping Sophie into her arms first. "Oh, my little sunshine." Sophie smiled, signing, "We won." Mara turned to Daniel, and for the first time called him by his first name without "Mr. Daniel, go home." "All three of you." Lena carefully placed a copy of the "We Are Safe" drawing into a frame, hanging it on the wall beside the window table. Beneath it, she taped a small note, "Where hearts are heard." Daniel stood behind her reading, making no edits like a good CEO, learning not to run everything. "Strawberry milk for me." Sophie signed, raising her hand. "2 glasses," Daniel said, half joking. "One for the little guest, and one for the woman who just interpreted a miracle." Lena laughed. "And you, I'll have peace," Daniel said, nodding to the black coffee. They sat at their familiar table. Lena opened a small charcoal-colored box, removed the safe charm, and placed it in Sophie's palm. "Tonight, you're the keeper of this word." "What about hope?" Sophie asked. "Hope always stays on the wrist of the one who reminds us to look toward the light," Daniel said, looking at Lena. Their eyes met and didn't drift away, a still point in a day full of movement. Sophie brought the 2 charms together, hope on Lena's wrist and safe in her hand, making them kiss like a small ceremony. She laughed aloud. Family. Mara turned on the radio, letting warm jazz float out. The reporter from earlier stepped in, but stopped short seeing the scene. He quietly stepped back as if afraid to pop a rainbow bubble. Daniel lifted his cup and lowered his voice. "I used to think victory was when my name made headlines, when the stock climbed to its peak. Today I know victory is when what matters most doesn't need anyone outside the 3 who see it." Lena placed her hand on the table, opening it like a path for his words to settle. Then, from tomorrow, she smiled. "We build one day at a time." One day, Daniel echoed as though signing a contract with only 3 words by hand. Sophie tilted her head toward the window. The rain had stopped. The sky washed clean, the last sunbeam glinting off the glass, like the wink of someone offering congratulations. She rested her cheek against Lena's arm and whispered barely more than breath home. The 3 of them laughed. No rush. On the wall, the "We Are Safe" drawing watched over them like a mirror, reminding them that victory isn't a destination. It's the ability to keep peace in the everyday. What's the most memorable victory you've had, not in money or fame? Write it in 2 sentences in the comments when it happened and why it touched you. Chapter 8. A New Season. On the outskirts of Portland, the road curved gently like a pencil line brushed across paper. Their house sat tucked beneath budding dogwood branches, the gray shingled roof dusted with moss, a wooden porch hung with wind chimes, and a white swing with chipped paint. Not the opulent kind of a billionaire CEO's home, but every corner bore the warmth of human presence. Sophie's muddy boots by the steps, Lena's lavender basket hanging by the doorframe, and in the living room window, a framed picture reading, "We are safe," like a greeting without words. On the first morning, sunlight poured across the wooden floor like honey. Lena set the kettle on the stove, listening to the faint crackle of steam, an intimacy she felt more with her hands than her ears. Daniel stepped in from the backyard in a gray t-shirt, soil still clinging to his hands after checking the tomato beds. He looked a little awkward in this new everyday version of himself, but his eyes were lighter in a way no boardroom could give him. "Coffee?" Lena asked, moving her lips slowly so Daniel could read them. "Coffee?" He nodded, and a little peace. Sophie darted past, hair tied off-center, clutching a thick notebook. She signed, "Today I'm Mom Lena's assistant teacher." "An assistant, huh?" Daniel said with pride he couldn't quite hide. "Then the head teacher better bring hope." He tapped the hope charm on Lena's wrist, where the safe charm clicked softly, their home's own private sound. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon butter and that invisible scent of a day beginning. Lena laid out hand-drawn flashcards on the table. "Hello, happy, listen with your eyes. Thank you, I am here." Sophie lined them up like train tracks, pushing her stuffed fox along each word. Daniel leaned against the counter, sipping coffee and watching the two girls in his life, one big, one small, realizing his new morning job was to keep those tracks clear. When the safe charm touched the table's edge, Lena realized she wasn't just wearing an object, she was wearing a morning in which Sophie ran without stumbling. Daniel smiled without forcing it, and the word home sat still in her chest. The neighborhood community center was an old red brick building, its glass doors plastered with a poster, "ASL for Everyone, Free Class" by Lena Harper. The classroom had a whiteboard, folding chairs, a lemonade jug, and a kids' corner with crayons and paper. People of all ages had come, an elderly couple wanting to talk to our granddaughter, a single mother holding her 2-year-old son with hearing aids, a mechanic from the auto shop, a few curious teenagers. Standing at the front, Lena's hands trembled, not from fear, but from realizing this was the dream she'd put away for years. The hope bracelet on her wrist felt like a friend holding her hand. Daniel sat in the back row, shoulders relaxed, fingers loosely interlaced to hold in the pride about to burst. Sophie stood near the board assistant teacher, setting down her notebook, signing a small hello. "Today we'll learn 3 things," Lena said slowly, signing alongside each word. "Hello. I am here. You are safe." She smiled, tapping her chest at here to show that here was not just a location but a promise. The class followed. Wrinkled hands trembled at the joints, small fingers fumbled, tattooed arms moved with careful precision, all in the same rhythm. Lena moved down each row, gently correcting a wrist's angle, brushing the back of someone's hand when they missed the motion. Sophie followed, handing out emotion faces she'd drawn herself. Happy, sad, scared, calm. A young mother's son turned his face away, refusing to look at the board. Lena knelt to his eye level, not to change him, only to rest her fingertip in his palm. "The sign, for I'm here." He looked at her, then pressed his tiny hand to hers. That was all. And his mother began to cry. Watching from the back, Daniel understood sometimes progress simply meant being a little less afraid. Midway, Lena introduced a poem in hands performed by Sophie. The little girl stepped forward, face serious, and began, "Family is where the heart is heard, hands over chest opening like a door. Peace is when you don't have to hurry, hands lowering, touching knees. Hope is a kite tied to your wrist finger, touching pulse, releasing to the sky." And a mother, Sophie, looked at Lena, then corrected, "The one who loves me is here." Hand resting on Lena's. The room went still, as if someone had draped a warm blanket over every shoulder. Daniel closed his eyes for one beat, letting the tears come and go like a welcome guest. When he opened them, Lena was crouched low to be eye level with his daughter, not stealing the spotlight, only holding it steady. An elderly woman whispered to her husband, "Maybe what we've needed all along isn't a better hearing aid, but to relearn how to touch each other's hands." Daniel heard it, not with his ears, but in the way the air in the room shifted. That afternoon, the porch was golden as melted butter. The wind chime rang now, and then the dogwood shimmered. Lena spread out a woven mat, a plate of Mara's waffles, a pot of orange blossom tea. Sophie sat cross-legged with her poems by hand's notebook eyes, bright with a secret thought. Daniel brought out a small video camera, not the corporate kind, but a family one. He set it on his knee, framing just enough of the sky behind Sophie. Family film directed by Sophie Carter, he teased. Action. Sophie signed with a grin. Her second poem of the day. Afternoon beside the one you choose. The wind touches my hand. I hear myself grow. These hands don't speak with a mouth, but when someone holds them, I can hear. Lena translated for the camera, but less than Sophie had signed, leaving space for silence to speak. Daniel looked through the viewfinder and saw something wider than any broadcast he'd ever produced. Every frame was honest. When they finished, Sophie insisted on watching it back. The three of them huddled shoulder to shoulder like kids under a blanket with a flashlight. Daniel's arm wrapped around them both, his thumb drawing slow circles on Lena's shoulder, a gesture without possession, simply at rest. I'm learning a second language, Daniel said casually. ASL, Lena asked. The language of peace, he smiled. Its grammar is slow, close, real. Lena leaned her head against his shoulder just enough to hear the leaves brushing each other. In that moment, Daniel understood why people called certain moments home, not for the walls or roof, but for the weight of ease resting on your shoulder. News of Lena's ASL class spread quickly. On Friday night, their backyard turned into a cozy potluck. Neighbors brought pies, salads, veggie burgers. Mara arrived with her signature waffles. The mechanic from class strung fairy lights along the fence. The young mother came with her son, today. He reached for Lena's hand first without prompting. Daniel fussed with the grill, clumsy enough to make Sophie giggle. Lena set a wooden board on the table, tonight's language, love and respect. Beneath it were three simple signs. Hello, I am here, thank you. Everyone who came through the gate was greeted in sign before in speech. Later, when the moon hung thin as a fingernail, they projected Sophie's hand poem onto the white wall. The backyard fell silent except for crickets. When the final words "I can hear" appeared, the mechanic cleared his throat. The elderly woman wiped her eyes. Mara squeezed Lena's hand. Daniel realized this little yard had just become the cinema for a film the audience was part of. After the gentle applause, a shy neighbor girl walked up to Sophie. Can you teach me to say, I'm here? Sophie nodded, smiling with her eyes, and placed her hand on the girl's. Within 10 minutes, they were teaching 3 more kids. The language moved through the garden like fireflies. Daniel stood at the edge of the crowd, hands in pockets, silent. Lena joined him, asking nothing, simply standing with him. I used to dream of grand stages, he admitted. But tonight a white wall is enough for me to feel alive. Because here, Lena touched her hope charm, her eyes shining. The audience doesn't clap for someone, they clap for us. He looked at her. The fairy lights fractured into hexagons in her eyes. He took her hand, not fingers interlaced, but palm to palm, the way people do when they've learned to listen to each other. A hand calloused from coffee trays, a hand stained with marker ink, both warm. From across the yard, Sophie signed family, and as if on cue, several guests tried to mimic the sign, clumsy but joyful. A young mother murmured to Lena, "For so long I feared my child's difference. Tonight I saw that difference as light." Lena said nothing, slipping her safe charm into the woman's palm for her to borrow proof that the word wasn't just for one household. Late at night, the yard emptied, the lights went out. The porch held only the sound of crickets and wind threading through the chimes. Sophie slept inside, curled around her fox. Lena and Daniel sat on the swing. The sky had no stars, but the city's glow spilled upward like a faint river of milk. I've got a board meeting next week, Daniel said, as if telling an old story. For the first time in ages, I'm not afraid of losing my seat, because I know my seat is here. He lifted their joined hands on this swing. If they ask, what's your next quarter's goal? Lena tilted her head. What will you say? Daniel smiled, already knowing the answer. Grow the peace index. KPI number of hand poems per week. Strategy: invest in listening. They sat in silence. No music, but if there had been, it might have been the soft jazz from Mara's radio carried in memory. Daniel glanced at the hope charm on Lena's wrist, the kind of light he could never buy, and realized his love had restructured itself. It no longer rushed toward possession. It stood beside her like a small lamp bright enough for the road. "Lena," he said, leaving off her last name. "I'm listening. Thank you for teaching me to speak in silence." She smiled, no jokes, no denial. "And thank you for hearing me, even when I haven't found the words yet." For a long while, they said nothing. The wind brushed Lena's hair over her shoulder. Daniel gently tucked it back slow, as if afraid to spill a breath. The moment was enough for a promise without words. Inside, Sophie turned in her sleep blanket pulled to her chin, safe. "Are you afraid?" Daniel asked suddenly. "I'm afraid of empty days," Lena admitted. "But since learning the 3 beats in holdout, I know I'm not breathing alone." He squeezed her hand a little tighter. Far away, a night car passed, leaving a faint streak of light before fading. The wind chime clinked, once the same sound as the safe charm, clicking, a reminder that peace has a sound, small but real. If Daniel had to write one line in his journal for the day, it would be, "The new season doesn't come with rain. It comes with the sound of one hand touching another." If Lena wrote hers, it might read, "Today the class was full, but the biggest lesson happened afterward on a swing." They stayed until they couldn't tell the difference between the sound of the wind and the sound of their hearts. And before heading inside, Daniel leaned forward, resting his forehead against Lena's, a gesture wordless but ancient. "We are equals." Lena closed her eyes, smiling without a sound. "Got it. I'll translate Chapter 10. The Call of Mama into English, keeping all names, places, and imagery intact, while making it read naturally and cinematically for an English-speaking audience. Chapter 10. The Call of Mama. Portland wore the soft green scarf of spring. Laurelhurst Park stretched out like a long, unbroken breath, its lake glittering gravel paths, winding rows of trees pushing out tender buds. Sparrows hopped across the grass, children chased soap bubbles, and the air was warm enough to make people forget the long gray rains of the Pacific Northwest. Under a cherry tree, just beginning to blush with blossoms, Lena spread a checkered picnic blanket. Sophie dragged over the wicker basket Mara's waffles, green apples, red grapes, and a bottle of strawberry milk, the right brand. Daniel followed with a thermos of black coffee and the old family camcorder that had been with them through this new season. "Today's 3 words," Lena said slowly, signing at the same time so Sophie could catch every beat, "are joy, peace, here." Sophie nodded, her mouth curling into a round smile. She solemnly set down her poems by hand's notebook, then darted off to pick a few dandelions, puffing their white seeds into the air, tiny fireworks drifting apart. Daniel watched her, his gaze softening. The dark circles under his eyes from sleepless nights were gone. So was the reflexive hunch of a man always bracing for a knock at the door. He sat beside Lena, poured his coffee, and simply stayed still. With her, he'd learned the hardest thing for a man wired for decide, act, optimized to sit still and be complete. "I remember the first time I brought her to the cafe," Daniel said, still watching Sophie. She stood on the chair looking out the window, wouldn't look at anyone. "I remember," Lena smiled, "and I remember the man in the rumpled suit completely undone. That day," he chuckled, "I thought I was about to lose one more thing. I didn't know I was about to gain 2. Lena didn't answer. She just rested her wrist on his knee, the hope charm giving a tiny chime like a raindrop on a leaf. Sophie turned, saw them sitting close, and signed from afar, "Family." They both signed back, awkward but happy. The picnic blanket became a small stage where fingers spoke more fluently than any polished words. In the middle of the busy park, the 3 of them chose something money couldn't buy: the same rhythm of peace. Sometimes the greatest victory in life is to sit down and realize you no longer need to guard yourself. At the far end of the lawn, a small neighborhood spring fair was in full swing. Food stalls, a face-painting corner, a little wooden stage with a microphone. A chalkboard leaned against it. "Open mic, share your spring." Children told stories, adults strummed guitars. Nothing was formal, but everything was warm. Sophie tugged Lena's hand. I want to read a poem. Here, Daniel glanced around, protective instinct kicking in at the sight of the crowd. Sophie nodded, her eyes steady. She'd read to the living room wall, to the string lights, to the wooden porch. Today, she wanted to read to the open sky. Lena knelt so they were eye to eye, placed one finger on the back of Sophie's hand, a private signal. I'm here. Then she let go, leaving the stage to the child. Sophie climbed onto the platform. She didn't need the microphone. The park didn't go silent, but the space around the stage seemed to still. Daniel stood at the base of the steps, unconsciously clutching the LH handkerchief in his pocket. Lena stood beside him, half watching Sophie, half watching the sunlight rippling across the lake, the same light that had carried them through storms. Her poem began in her hands. I learned to listen without my ears. I listen when someone holds my hand. I learned to speak without my mouth. I speak when someone waits for me to be slow. She paused before the last line, as if remembering the person who had waited for her slowness. Eyes around the lawn softened. A boy with a hearing aid gripped his mother's shoulder. An elderly woman dabbed at her eyes. Sophie continued. Spring isn't in the sound of birds. It's in the wrist where the heart touches. I call peace with my hands, and I call home with two hands joined. Her hands formed a roof, then pulled it to her chest. Below, Daniel held his breath. Lena touched her sternum, feeling her heartbeat line up with the child's. When the poem ended, the applause was soft at first, then fuller, not loud but deep. The host stepped forward to thank our little poet. Sophie bowed, started down the steps, and just then a gust lifted the stage rug. She tripped. It all happened in 2 heartbeats. Daniel lunged forward, but Lena reached her first arms open. Sophie fell into them without injury. The stumble was like a comma letting the sentence breathe. Some falls are beautiful because they answer one clear question. When I fall, where do I land? Here the answer was already waiting, a pair of arms that needed no invitation. Still in Lena's arms, Sophie tilted her head up close enough to see the fine baby hairs at Lena's temple, the silver glint of the hope charm against her pulse. Her lips moved, shaping a word she'd held for a long time or perhaps had never spoken. Ma. The sound escaped, small, husky, like chalk, just touching a blackboard. Lena froze. Her lips parted, her eyes instantly wet. Daniel forgot to breathe. Sophie swallowed, gathering a year of silence and a season of learning to speak with her hands, and let it out whole, mama. The word broke open, but not sharp. It bloomed like a flower opening at exactly 8 o'clock in the morning. The park's noise went on, but around them it felt as if the air had been lined with velvet. Somewhere a kite snagged in a tree and then lifted free again, as if in applause. Lena couldn't speak. She just held her. Her arms tightened enough for Sophie to know exactly where she was, enough for Daniel to see and feel no absence at all. Her tears warmed Sophie's hair, brushing the back of Daniel's hand as he reached in 3 paths, meeting at one point. Daniel stepped closer, wrapping both of them in his arms. He closed his eyes, dropped his shoulders, filling his lungs with the scent of a child's hair and Lena's soap. A man who could once command a media stage now commanded nothing. He was simply there. His heartbeat thudded into Lena's chest, and through her into Sophie one unbroken line. Sweetheart, he whispered, his voice breaking but gentle. You just gave me a whole world. Sophie stayed in the embrace, turned to touch Lena's wrist, pressing lightly against the safe charm, her habit of saving a moment. Lena laughed through tears, pulled Sophie's hand to sign, You're safe. Sophie signed back, then looked to Daniel and added, Daddy's safe too. Some words once spoken rearranged the private universe of a family. Mama was one of those. It set the person on the left, the person on the right, and the space between into a new order. From now on, it would be home. They sat back down on the grass. Lena placed Sophie between them like a jewel in a velvet-lined box. Daniel didn't let go of Lena's hand. Lena didn't let go of Sophie. The 3 of them formed a horseshoe, open toward the lake, open toward the days ahead. Do you hear it? Daniel asked, still watching the water. Hear what Lena's fingers brushed Sophie's hair, the sound of the boardroom in me turning off, and the sound of home turning on. He paused, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a small object, the folded LH handkerchief. He didn't kneel, didn't make a speech. He simply opened it to reveal a small, plain silver key. "This isn't a ring," Daniel said, half teasing. "It's the key to the porch. From today on, I don't want you to knock. You're here." Lena looked at the key, then at Daniel, then at the child scribbling a new verse in the grass. She took the key without trembling. "I've been standing outside the door of life for a long time," she said quietly. "If you're sure there's room inside for my slowness and my silences." "I'm sure," Daniel replied instantly. "I want to fill the house with that slowness, and whenever we're afraid, we'll have 3 beats and hold out." Sophie popped up, showing them her notebook. Home is where no one asks, "Why are you slow?" Home asks, "How long do you want?" Home doesn't lock the door. It just hangs a bell that rings when the one you love comes back. They both laughed. Lena pulled Sophie close, kissed her forehead, and whispered a new word, "Daughter." Sophie giggled, leaning into her chest, a posture so natural that strangers walking by smiled without knowing why. Daniel flipped on the camcorder, filmed for 3 seconds, then shut it off. "That's enough," he said. "The rest, we'll just live." The breeze carried the scent of fresh grass and vanilla ice cream from a nearby cart. Daniel bought 3 cones. Sophie took a giant bite, wincing from the cold. Lena laughed. Daniel teased, "Our CEO love story just hit KPI, 1 laugh a day from ice cream, that's too cold, and 1 listen a day from a hand placed just right." Lena added, touching her hope plus safe charms to his. The silver kissed with a tiny click. A promise doesn't need a ring if it's worn on your wrist every day. A key doesn't just open a door, it opens a pace of life. The sun slid behind the trees, laying an apricot-colored blanket over the grass. On the lake, the water darkened, but streaks of light still stretched like silk ribbons. The sound of children thinned. A bicycle bell chimed, faintly fading away like a footnote. Sophie ran to the park's wooden swing, pumping high, her shoes drawing soft commas in the air. Each time she swung toward them, she signed "family, family." Family, as if afraid the word might slip away unless she called it 3 times. Lena lay on her side, propped on one elbow, looking at Daniel. "Do you know the moment I love my everyday life the most? When Sophie speaks without words, and when you care without fixing." Daniel smiled. "In reports, people hate empty spaces. But here the empty spaces are where peace sits." Sophie leapt off the swing, running back like a soft arrow. She threw her arms around Lena's neck, her cheeks flushed with wind and laughter. Mama Lena hugged back, a tiny sob slipping out, a sob of thanks. Daniel arrived half a beat later, wrapping them both, his forehead resting against Lena's temple. "Thank you for coming," he murmured into her hair. "And thank you," he told Sophie, for calling. They stood like that longer than planned. Wind passed birds, shifted branches, somewhere a guitar strummed everything, weaving into a spring lullaby. Lena touched Daniel's wrist for just a minute, as if pressing save again. He nodded, he understood. Before leaving the park, Sophie pulled them close, signing "family photo." Daniel asked a passerby to take it. In the picture, the sky behind them was the color of peach blossoms. Sophie hugged Lena's neck, grinning. Lena's eyes were bright despite their redness. Daniel leaned in, holding them both. On Lena's wrist, "Hope plus safe" glinted a silver dot, punctuating a long, perfect sentence. The stranger smiled as they returned the camera. Beautiful family. No one corrected beautiful to chosen because they knew the two were the same. They folded the blanket, gathered their things, and walked hand in hand to the parking lot. Sophie hopped from paving stone to paving stone, counting on her fingers. Every time she reached 6, her age, she turned back and called out "Mama" softer each time, like savoring candy. Lena never tired of hearing it. Neither did Daniel. The daylight withdrew. The park lights flickered on. The day could have ended like any other, but for them it was a milestone. No reporters, no press releases, no hashtags. Just 3 people and 1 word that had rearranged their sky. In your own journey, what single word has ever healed you, whether spoken to you or spoken by you? Hearing with the heart. A few months later, the small suburban garden in Portland was alive with the sound of shovels meeting soil. Beneath the row of dogwoods, Lena wore soft cotton gloves. Daniel knelt over the planting bed, and Sophie crouched low, placing each seed into the furrow as if arranging the punctuation marks of a brand new story. The wind chimes swayed and sang gently. Sunlight poured slowly warm as a kept promise. Why do you smile when no one's talking? Sophie looked up, her blue eyes clear as glass. Lena wiped her forehead, smiling. Because I listen with my heart. Daniel's hands stilled. That answer sank into the soft earth and took root instantly. A man who once listened only to reports and charts now understood the sound that changed his life. Hadn't come from a stage, it had come from a heart that knew how to hear. Sophie brushed a thin layer of soil over the seeds and patted it gently. I listen with my hands too. She touched her fingers to Lena's wrist, saving the moment into the safe charm like a ritual. Daniel leaned down, his broad hand covering the 2 smaller ones. 3 breaths merged into one. From the house behind them, the framed "We are safe" caught the sun, placing a solid period on a story that had weathered its storms. Spring bloomed. Green shoots broke through brown soil and dawn opened across each new leaf. Daniel hung a small wooden sign in front of the planting bed, handwritten, "Where hearts are heard." Beneath it he signed 3 more words: hope, safe, family. Not a corporate tagline, but the life manifesto of a CEO who had redefined success, peaceful growth, dividends of love. Night fell. They sat on the porch, no rings, no fireworks, just the porch key hanging beside the wind chime, giving a soft ting whenever someone came home. And together they understood family is a choice you make over and over each day, to slow down, to hear, to stay silent, to understand, to hold hands when words aren't enough. On the first day, Sophie had spoken only with her eyes. On the last day, she called Mama in the middle of the park, rearranging the sky for all 3 of them. Since then, every morning in the garden was another way of rewriting their vows, not in ink, but in soil, sunlight, and hands placed in the right place. Money can build walls, power can open gates, but only listening with the heart can open a home. The garden gate stayed ajar. Tomorrow, Lena's ASL class would welcome new faces. Sophie's poem in Hands video was about to touch strangers' hearts far away. And Daniel, a CEO who had learned to cry at the right time, was preparing a small Hope and Safe fund to support community classes. This story closed in the garden, but the journey of spreading light was only just beginning. Success is not measured by noise, but by the depth of peace. To love is to stand beside, not in front. Family is not just where you were born, it's where your heart is heard. Do you believe a stranger can become your family? Share your story in the comments. Just a few lines might be enough to warm someone's evening. If this story touched you, leave a rating from 1 to 10 and follow, so you won't miss the next Healing CEO Love Stories. And before you go, type just 1 word in the comments. The word that once saved you, like hope, safe, or home, so we can keep each other here.